So, hey, thanks again for tuning in into our podcast series called Unpacking Web3 with Aviyel, where we sit with folks who are revolutionizing the Web3 space. We dive into their journey and talk about everything in and around Web3. Just a very quick introduction about me. I am Utkarsh. I am a developer evangelist at Aviyel. And what exactly are we doing at Aviyel? So, Aviyel's on a mission to create scalable monetization avenue for projects. And at the same time, we are aiming to do everything that we do while preserving that project's open source character. And we are trying to introduce the concepts of DAOs and tokenization to drive projects incentivization. And basically, to sum it all up, at its core, we are helping open source projects scale and make them sustainable. Coming back to today's podcast session, we have an amazing guest with us today, Yash, who currently works at Chapter One as head of research and experiments. He might be a very familiar face for folks who've read the amazing Twitter threads that he is writing about, which are about products and protocols around Web3. And yeah, Josh, thanks again for taking out the time for this podcast. But it's only fair to get a very quick intro about you for the audience to understand the context. So yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, first of all, for having me, and it's like a kind intro. So yeah, I'm glad to chat. But just a quick intro about me. My name is Yash. I currently work as head of research and experiments at Chapter One. So essentially, I'm building out the in-house R&D studio for Chapter One to explore in as many uh, interesting and new sort of domains that are popping up in Web3. The Web3 space moves really fast, so it's important to stay relevant and up to date with what's going on in terms of different structures for NFTs, DAOs, etc. And we can get into that later. But previously, I was a developer at Salesforce, and that's around, I started getting into crypto sort of late 2019, early 2020. And since then, once you sort of
Yeah.
start, it's like a rabbit hole, and have been diving deeper. But yeah, excited to share sort of the journey and how I got in.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is like a pretty basic question that I asked almost everyone in tech. So, answer somehow still turns out to be very different. So, yeah. So, what was your first Hello World and how were you introduced into the world of developers? And if so, if by whom, if there is a person? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think like even before like Hello World, I started my I remember like my mom when I was like a kid, she would like tell me about HTML or website development and stuff. So this is like when I was like super young, and I just got like I actually wrote I think HTML code as my first code. I remember trying to build out just like a website, like for something fun that I was building back then. But I'd say like really when I started getting into coding was in high school. In like ninth grade, I think I took a class, computer science one, and that's where I started learning like with Java and very basic like Hello World things. I think there was like a bit of Scratch as well, just to learn about how object oriented programming goes. But that was really like the beginning of like my entry into developer world and just like the tech and code in general. I've always been super excited about the hardware side of things as well. Like I enjoyed earlier, like what I would do is I wanted to raise money to like build and buy my own
Yeah.
computer. So in order to learn about the process, I would just do it for other people and like go out and buy their parts, try to customize and build out a computer for them. So that was like a super fun thing for me. But I ended up in college picking electrical and computer engineering to focus in. And I stuck more to the software side because I think that resonated with me more. It was just faster. There was a lot of like development going on, but yeah, I'd say that's sort of like how I got into the tech world. I think it's always been an interest of me to just build really cool things in tech.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. I remember I started with a thing called MS Logo. It was pretty common in the Indian curriculum where we start with MS Logo
Hmm.
in, I guess, second or third grade. That is how I started. But then starting with HTML, I mean,
Yeah.
that's crazy. That is actually,
No, and it was just like very basic as well. It was just like, oh wow, like more. I think I should say focus on the CSS side of things, just because it's very easy to
yeah,
visualize and understand. But
yeah,
yeah, fun
yeah.
time for sure.
So let's dive into the main context of the whole why as to why we are even hosting the podcast series. So after looking at your profile, uh, I was very much curious about the whole transition that you made from as a full stack developer at Salesforce to the whole Web3 side of things and going into research. So how did the whole journey of Web3 even begin, and what was the transition from Web2 to Web3 like?
Yeah. So for me, it was actually I came at it from much more of a economics and investing side into crypto. So I've always been super into like investing in stocks and learning about options and essentially just like market dynamics in general. And around I think end of 2019, right around when COVID was hitting, I started like hearing a bit more about Bitcoin in general. I think there is a Balaji podcast. I forget the exact one that I somehow like stumbled upon on Twitter and started listening to, and that really got me excited about just the space in general and finding that led me to just like find different like articles and podcasts, YouTube videos. I was like basically just completely invested in Bitcoin at that point. Really thinking about like things like the properties of money, how current inflation problems were going, just more on the like economic and Bitcoin maxi side of things. And then eventually that led me to get to Ethereum, reading the white paper there, more focus in DeFi and NFTs. But the transition itself, I think there's like two parts to crypto itself for me. It was like one was getting into crypto and just learning about it as first as an investment and then as a technology. And then the second part is really uh, getting into crypto in terms of contribution side. So not just learning, but actively going and buying NFTs, participating in DeFi protocols, contributing to DAOs, things like that. And I think that started happening to me like around 2021 after a year of just like learning nonstop and getting super excited about it. And I started this pseudonymous account in April of 2021 where I just posted more about what I was learning to get myself out there. And I think a lot of the people started liking some of the topics that I was writing. And I just kept on doing that more and more, and eventually decided I wanted to quit Salesforce because so much movement was happening in Web3. It was so much fun. It felt like a video game. And yeah, so I quit. And at that point, my life became Web3. I've just been reading, researching, writing, meeting new people in the space.
Yeah, I guess Web3 is moving at a pace that is not comprehensible for a lot of people who are out there, especially in
Yeah.
Web2. And every second counts, right? Every every second that you're not tweeting, I think you're missing out on something, especially reading threads on Twitter. So tech Twitter, obviously, it is the leading gem for Web3 content out there. But then, yeah, I might be repeating myself, but then I'm a big fan of the threads that you've been writing. It has helped me a lot to even understand stuff because I myself am transitioning from Web 2 to Web 3, and handling my
Yeah.
work in Web 2 and then learning about Web 3, it kind of gets pretty difficult, especially because there's a lot of things that you have to start from learning. Learning from basics. So yeah, Twitter threads are obviously,
Yeah.
yeah, a
Um,
major help in that segment.
I definitely agree with the notion of like it's hard to do Web3 on the
Yeah,
side of your like Web2 job. And I faced that as well at Salesforce because I was like itching for any extra time that I could be on Twitter. And it almost like creates a sense of FOMO because you want to be on Web3 Twitter as much as you can.
yeah,
So I feel like it's a matter of eventually building up enough conviction in
yeah.
Web3 to just, take the leap of faith and go
Yeah,
for it, I
yeah,
guess.
definitely. Hopefully, I do that someday, or maybe I get to transition
Yeah, no,
into something that is very much aligned to Web3. And thankfully, my company is doing that, and we are taking a leap into the Web3 space.
right.
And yeah, but then also, like while researching about your profile, I saw that maybe it was during your university that you already had a few venture profiles during, maybe it was an internship or the working. So that did being in the VC space and along with the research around it, it help you transition better and faster. And also, like, if yes, then what is the advice for the folks that you would want to give who are starting with Web3? Because from what I see, is uh, there's a lot of content and information that is already out there, and for the ones who might be starting, they might be it's like imposter syndrome, right? So what advice would you give to that for?
Yeah. I'd say honestly, I never even focused on like a VC mindset until like I started this role at Chapter One just about a couple of months ago, and I think I always came at it with like a very much of like a product mindset. I was just excited about really interesting products that were getting shipped or built. Like I'm a huge like product hunt user in general, and like love seeing what people are working on and launching. And I think what happens that as you get deeper and deeper into like the world of like development, product management, stuff like that, VC and accelerator. like YC innovative, like they just like come
Yeah.
into the picture just because of how like intertwined everything is. And I did do like some scouting for a friend that was working at a firm as well, so just really picking like a certain ecosystem. I was like looking into the Austin entrepreneurship community because I went to UT Austin, and finding the interesting startups that were being built there. But I think instead of like, yeah, it's just sort of like touching on your point. It's like not necessarily like coming at it with like an investor or VC mindset, more of just like, hey, this is like really cool product development that's happening. And I naturally shifted towards Web3 because I almost thought, to me, like Web2 products were sort of boring. Like it was like consistently like a Shopify for X or a Uber for X or something like that. And there was like almost like a saturation of the ideas that were being built in Web 2. And then Web 3, you go and it felt like almost like a toy, right? There's that famous quote out there. It's like the next big thing always starts off looking as a toy. And the idea of like what DeFi and NFTs and all these things were, it just was so much more fun and involved. So it was naturally just because the product was more interesting that I shifted over there. And I think you
Yeah.
also asked the advice, I guess, in terms of like getting into Web3.
Yeah.
And the imposter syndrome thing, I think everyone definitely faces, especially just because um, on crypto Twitter, it can come off like a lot of people like are writing about these extremely complicated things and saying these cool things. And I think even now I face imposter syndrome like all the time because it's like, are my thoughts out there? Am I really sure about them, or what is it? But it sort of like comes to this realization where it's like everyone is sort of fake it till you make it kind of vibe, where just learn and sort of have fun on the way. And if you can make money on the side, that's great. If you meet new friends, start new projects, that's great. So I think that mindset has helped me a lot more from straying away of like, oh, like I have to know everything about every single DAO or NFT. But no, you can just take it one step at a time, I think, and that's okay.
Yeah, so true. I mean, this is something that I've seen. I've even met with a lot of folks behind the scenes where I've always it is sort of fundamental that for the folks who are into VC, they never wanted to be in the VC space. It is somehow the pathway that they took because of their interests that were lying with the product space and just
Mhm.
getting their hands dirty in the whole product space and just learning about them and researching. That is how they even ended up in the VC space, and not because they actually wanted to be there. I read about your interesting thread around decentralization. Like those are one of my favorite threads out there that you put out there. So assuming there might be folks in the audience listening for the first time, could you tell us about what this decentralization actually is and why is it important in the whole Web3 ecosystem?
Yeah, I think like decentralization is such a broad term in general that I think there's so many different meanings and
Yeah.
interpretations of it. But to me, like to me, what like the idea of decentralization is sort of um, spreading like opportunities, value, just essentially like bringing coordination to everyone, right? Rather
Yeah.
than it being a very much of like a top down approach,
Yeah.
right? Right now, when we think about just looking at like major brands that we know today, right? Like Goldman Sachs, Facebook, just like these big, massive institutions that have a very core team at the top and set essentially the entire culture of how everyone else, in the world, I guess, at that point, right, is going to operate and gets to do and what they can't do, right? And there's that restriction there that I think everyone has become so used to that we don't even realize that, wait a minute, we can actually do things a different way. Why are we all doing it this one way, right? And I think what decentralization gets at is that we don't need this central authority at the top, or like, this top down approach. We can do more of like a grassroots model where people can just sort of create their own stories, their own narratives, right, and build those out. And that's like I think really the essence of like decentralization is like bringing like community coordination to all people rather than just like this very funneled channel of thinking, basically.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I agreed with the point where in the starting you said that decentralization, as of now, it has a lot of meanings, and then there's a lot of interpretations that can be taken out of it.
Mhm.
Especially, I mean, everybody. they might be ending up at the same thing, but then the way they explain might be still very different. But then, yeah, thanks for explaining
Right.
that. And now let's come to the part of where this that is actually one of the problems that a lot of organizations out there are still looking to solve in the Web3 space. So this comes with the user experience, right? So what are your views on the current UX in the Web3 space compared to Web2, especially the current dynamics of onboarding to the various projects? Uh,
Hmm.
that usually come with some sort of a roadmap to follow. So how do you think this would change in the future, if it will? And so what I'm getting at is also like, for now there's for someone who's pretty new to the whole Web3 ecosystem, right? Like, let's say they want to be a part of a DAO or a DeFi that is already there. They have Most of them, they also work on the gamification side of things, where they wanted to make it interesting for the users, right? But then I think, I mean, I might be wrong, but then in the current roadmap they actually want the users to follow. There might be a lot of drop-offs in the initial stages where the users are like, "Hey, this is too much for somebody who's trying to get in." So, yeah, what are your views on that?
Um, Sorry, because I think there are a couple of questions there. So,
Yeah.
first,
So the first was about the UX in the current Web3 space compared to Web2.
okay, yeah. So maybe to touch on that really quickly. Yeah, so we Web3 is very, very early in its UX, and actually, Chapter One as a firm, our main thesis is focused on the idea of helping these early stage Web3 protocols and products with product and design mindset, right? And the way I actually sort of think about it is everyone in Web3 and crypto space right now, most people have come in from like the narrative really being interested in like the future of technology or the future of money and this idea of decentralization and ownership economy, etc. But that group of people is eventually going to plateau off, right? And if you just compare it to like the internet, like there was like this early group of internet adopters that understood it, they saw the vision for it, right? And they were the early adopters. But the internet only really became accessible later once there was like good design, good products, easy stuff, like Facebook and the other products that we all know today, to just make it really simple for everyone that was actually joining, right? And I think like a similar trajectory is going to happen for crypto as well, is where the next wave of NFT users or just Web3 users in general are going to be joining because they are being met with a very simple and friendly UX. I've been in the space for 2 years, but still every time I use my MetaMask wallet, I feel like sort of scared, just signing a transaction. Will I get hacked? What will happen? And it's very clear as to why people think certain things are Ponzi schemes and DeFi protocols. So a lot of the focus, I think, will go on UX, and it's not that that's a difficult thing, right? What's happening now that I'm even noticing is a lot of product managers and developers and UX folks, right, that are working at big Web2 companies like Facebook and Stripe, etc. They're realizing it's hey, like there's a much bigger need for my skill sets in the Web3 world right now. And you're seeing this mass migration of talent go to Web3 because there's a ton of development and designing that needs to happen. So I think the next couple of years are going to be really fun to see the different kinds of ways we interact with crypto technology in general.
Yeah, and so how do you think this changes in the future, if it will? Uh, yeah, the whole ecosystem of the UX.
Um, I think it'll be a lot more seamless and not like for example, like today we have like Connect Wallet,
Yeah.
right? And I think that is a very big Web3 UX future. I think we're going to see a ton of different like almost like knickknacks, I guess, like that, like come up. And just like we sort of log into Facebook or use our Gmail and stuff today, I think there is going to be over the next couple of years just this seamless like effort to using crypto products as well, where it doesn't feel scary and it makes complete sense. And just a good way to think about it is uh, when the App Store came out in 2008, 2009, right? Like the iPhone smartphones were very new. Everyone was thinking about Blackberries or flip phones and things like that, right? And in the similar way, I like to think of the iPhone just as like the Ethereum blockchain and all of these apps that are built in like iOS ecosystem. It's the same thing, right? There's just a bunch of Web3 apps, like literally the Web3 App Store on these different chains like Ethereum and Avalanche and Polygon or whatever, right? And at the beginning in 2010, 2011, there was a lot of tech enthusiasts who had to come out and be like, hey, you should use this app because it's helpful for you for this reason and it makes your life easier in this way. And I think similarly, it's going to take a lot of these tech hobbyists and enthusiasts to write about these different, that's why I wrote those threads on different products and protocols. It's like, hey, let me take a single app, explain why it's so helpful and why people should use it. And I think you're going to, and now today, everyone from like babies, like toddlers to like, my grandparents are using apps on iPads and iPhones and whatever, right? And I think similarly, you're going to see a same sort of dynamic where everyone is going to be using apps, whether they like it or not, I think, as mass adoption grows in the next decade.
Yeah, makes sense. Uh, yeah, so that was answered pretty well. I mean, uh, I still feel there's a lot of improvement to be done, especially in the UX space, and there's a lot of
Hmm.
organizations coming up just to solve those problems. And I mean, I don't want to name them as such because I might be wrong, because I'm still very much new to all this. But then, yeah, I mean, if given that Web3 is still in very initial days, I mean, it makes sense that there's a lot of improvement for the UX to be done. But then, yeah, so now let's come to the part where we talk a little bit focused on the VC and the DAO space. So as you are completely into the whole research and the VC space. So like, I'm just pretty curious about this, and that is why I even got this into the talk flow. Like, is the backing from community of a specific Web3 project, uh, it does it affect the decision of the VCs that are interested in investing in them? Like, does the community backing often translate into Web3 project being successful, according to your research or your experience? And in the long run, are there things just by the community backing that people outside those communities that they don't see?
Yeah, I think definitely, right? It's the same thing as like just product market fit in general, right? And that same logic applies in the Web3 space as well, right? And there are quantifiable metrics as well that you can see. So if you think, what is the future of an NFT project, there's a floor price metric, right? To see, okay, floor price literally means what does the community, the owners of this NFT project value the project itself at, right? So that's one example. And then like even in DeFi protocols, total locked value of a protocol means how much money is in that ecosystem on that protocol and that smart contract, right? Which shows, okay, the community really thinks there's like a future here, or there is some sort of interest and value that is being accrued dynamically, right? And it's like the same question as asking like a Web2 consumer social like product is like, how many daily active users do you have? How many monthly active users do you have, right? And it's like a similar concept. So that's what helps VCs in Web 2 and VCs in Web 3. There is very similar metrics, that apply for Web 3 specific products.
Makes sense. And so, I mean, just to sum it up, so community backing does affect the decision of the VC interested in the whole thing. Yeah, because it often
Yeah,
translate.
yeah, because it shows interest and basically value accrual.
Understood. So as of now, so Web3 projects and the way they are quantified in terms of success, it is still very much proportional to the community backing that it has for the projects that are there in Web3.
Well, to be fair, I think it's one of the parameters,
Okay.
right? Sometimes community backing can be a false perception as well, where there's
Yeah.
an initial hype and money is thrown at it at the beginning, like a good there's like a lot of different examples, like just to pick maybe like even Clubhouse as an example,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot of initial users and product and hype, but sometimes sustainability is different. So that is another like parameter that goes into thinking about, is the fuel like going to last long enough to actually hit the next level of development or the next level of the product. And it's not just community backing
Makes
that
sense.
is the only metric
Yeah,
itself.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was great that it was included in the top floor. Now we come to the second part of the question. So what are the certain aspects of Web3 projects that a VC currently in today's space look forward to, at least to start the warm intros with them, right? Because I was listening to a podcast that happened that was done by Rabbit Hole Gigi, and we had Gabby Goldberg there. She was talking about how the whole VC space is transformed into somewhere where now the project leads are the ones who have taken the ownership, and now VCs are actually pitching to them about how we can provide value to them. And in the Web 2 spaces was pretty the other way around, right? Where the founders used to go to the VCs and they used to be like, hey, this is how we can help you out, and we need this is the place where we need the funding. And yeah, so in terms of that, so what are the certain aspects of Web3 projects that a VC currently are looking forward to?
Current projects that so I won't speak for VCs as a whole, but for me personally, I think what really interests
Yeah.
me is very niche domains that haven't been researched too much, right? That's where I spend a lot of my time thinking about is like, okay, uh, not like if you take NFTs for example, right? Not intros to NFTs, but really what is like the most up and coming like market dynamics that we're seeing that in the next couple of years probably we'll see a lot more of, right? And it's like the same idea of like whoever caught CryptoPunks in 2017, right? They saw the future of like that NFT PFP model, and maybe now today that's something else, right? Or there's like a different kind of like method of interacting with NFTs, for example, through fractionalization, or maybe it's like a new merge of like NFTs and augmented reality, or NFTs and DeFi, right? So where I'm getting at with that point is I personally look for very interesting products that are trying to dive into a space that there isn't a lot of competitors in, or a lot of thoughts. I'm more curious to speak with founders who think their product might fail, or they don't even know if there's like a future there, because I think that's like very much like the forefront, and in that sense it's like what's next in Web3. um yeah, I guess does that sort of answer the question before I continue?
Yeah, 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 it does. Yeah, yeah, uh,
Okay.
yeah. You're saying something?
No, I just like to sort of wrap that thought up in
Yeah,
general. It's uh like a lot of it also depends on like what phase of like money you're trying to deploy as well, right? If you're focused on later stage vehicles, right, like more Series C, Series D, or even projects that are closer to like an ICO, I think that's like a different kind of like mental model versus thinking about stuff that is very early in terms of like seed stage, and there's a lot of like unclarity on what the future of that domain looks like, and like I think for me it's more interesting to be on that earlier side of
yeah,
things.
makes sense. I mean, I totally clicked on the point where you said about diving into the spaces that have never been dealt with before, and Web3. What I feel is Web3 is often giving ways to solve those Web2 problems that was so difficult to solve just being in that ecosystem. So that is something what we were
Mhm.
actually trying to do at Aviyel, where we started off with just uh, pitching that this is the company that we are forming and we are trying to monetize open source projects. So we had a little bit of backlash where they were like, hey, monetizing and open source, it doesn't work together. But then we were like, I mean, this is monetization for the people who are actually leading those projects, right? And not to make a commercial
Mhm.
model out of it, right? And then we were like, okay, so let us include. We took the pathway of creating DAOs, tokenizations, and NFTs to create that incentivization models. And I mean, uh, our founders even talked to a lot of VCs and pretty good people out there, and they were like, okay, so this is something that was not done before, and if it was done before
Mhm.
by a few folks, they probably failed because they were whole into the whole Web2 ecosystem of it. So I mean, it does click with me as to diving into the places that have been not dealt with before. Yeah. So also what so also just to follow up, I mean, it can be a one line or two. So what is the best way VC would also describe a strong Web3 brand? So, does it come with the following it has on Twitter, or same thing about community backing, or maybe diving into the things that have not been dealt with before, something like that?
Yeah, I think something for me that's like a strong, what represents a strong Web3 brand is almost like thinking about it like a meme, right? Like, what are the memes that you most remember in the last couple of like
Makes
years,
sense.
right? And the strongest of those memes, the ones that you remember are the strongest of those memes that survived, right? And in that same sense, like the Web3 brand, it's like if you launch a certain project or a token or something, the utility is maybe one thing for sure, right? But more, it's like, can you get across your mission in a very simple and concise way as to what you're going for with this collection or this project? And I think the strongest Web3 brands are the ones that are able to almost do that in a very fun and memey way, right? Something that sticks and it's catchy. It's
Yeah.
you can joke about it, but also there's like a much deeper meaning, right? Like for example, like in the Web3 world, we say GM, right? All over crypto Twitter,
Yeah.
if you've been on it, you've seen it, right? And it's like on a surface level, it's just like a fun, like good morning, like like wherever you are. But on a deeper meaning, it also like references like this idea that hey, we're decentralized, we're all over the world. It's like it's always morning somewhere in the world, that kind of a vibe, and it's like. GM just means it's like an open ecosystem. It's like always morning somewhere, so it's a fellow greeting, right? So, I think that that sort of like vibe, I guess, is what you want to be able to portray off in your Web3 brand and have that stickiness, through just like a fun meme.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, the GM part I actually didn't know. Thanks for telling me because I wasn't aware of the whole GM
Yeah,
thing. But then, yeah, so now let's dive into the, the thing about investment DAOs, right? Because they are turning out to be the futures of how VCs would work in the Web3 ecospace. And so, how do you see the investment DAOs entering and altering the venture landscape? This is also referring to your thread on Syndicate DAO. It is just an example. I
yeah.
might be wrong about it, but then it is about uh, a little alteration to the venture ecosystem that is already there, but then a little alteration towards the Web3 side. So, how do you see investment DAOs altering the ecospace?
Yeah. I think I like to frame it more as not as investment DAOs or like a replacement for like a new form of VCing, but more so just like a much simpler and easier way to coordinate capital together, right? Across the world anonymously in any form or fashion, just through that clarity in the smart contract, right? And the assurance that you get. Um, I do think like the concept of investment DAOs is already super important and going to be a lot more important in the future, just because uh, it is such a well, it's not a frictionless, but it's like a lot more frictionless, I guess, to now pull together capital to just do something, unique in a very short period of time. And, there's always that classic example of, um, I forget, I think it was like for Pleaser DAO, but like, just like a single tweet can go and get like, hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars coordinated together from people all around the world that don't know each
Yeah.
other, but all have like a single goal, right? And that can be done, in under like 30 minutes you can get that going, and before you know it, you're buying a piece and now you own something with like a bunch of people. And it's that concept I think is going to be super interesting, not necessarily just for venture, but I see that being applied in lots of things like real estate, family funds, etc. What one big hurdle that I do worry about is how legal issues will work, right? And like I think that's like one of the biggest barriers that probably even syndicate is facing right now, is like what restrictions do they have in terms of these DAOs? There's like the Wyoming DAO law and
Exactly.
all of that. We're like what is the gray line
Yeah.
between legal and this is just too crypto. So but yeah, I think as we figure that out, it'll be super interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, almost a lot of DAOs who have some investment model attached to them, they are uh, on a very fine line, right? Where they are like, okay, this might be wrong, and but then in the Web3 ecospace, this is right. But then in terms of legalities, this might be wrong, something like that. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
podcasts also happening on that front, and I would love to dive into that space later. But
Yeah.
then, yeah, that was a very great session. Yash, and thanks for joining in. I mean, I know you're
Awesome.
pretty busy, and thanks for taking out the time. So just last question.
Yeah.
So what's next for you? I mean, a little sneak peek into the next role you look forward to into Web3, or maybe not the next role, but then something exciting that you're working on as of now.
Yeah. I think something that I'm pretty much heads down focused on now is really just researching and launching really cool MVPs with Web3 community members, right? So I want to just pick different topics that I am interested and curious about and dive deeper. And if, I see product pain points that are there, I would want to work with anyone that's interested really to make, I guess, the community a more efficient place, right? Just like launch fun MVPs. So I guess for me, it's like anyone, I guess, like listening to this, it's if you're interested in like learning about Web3 or just want to build something alongside with other people, I want to form that entrepreneurship, almost like a studio for
Makes
Web3,
sense.
and would love to work with anyone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so basically a lot of projects together. I mean, a lot of people working for different projects under one roof, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Just like a fun studio house where experiments fail and something might come out of, random, like, just like a fun
Web3
idea.
house.
But
Sounds pretty good. Yeah,
yeah,
so within this
yeah.
is a physical space, right? Or metaverse.
This is every anyone in the world can join and contribute. It doesn't have to be in any form or
Yeah.
fashion. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. So yeah, thanks again for joining in, Yash. Any closing lines from your side?
No, I'm just, I guess, if I guess anyone is on the fence of Web 2 and Web 3, I highly encourage just, trying to spend that initial time to get hooked. Once you get hooked, it's like a endless rabbit hole, and it's so much fun to just be in, this side of the ecosystem. So, there's a ton of content out there, and, feel free to reach out to me if you ever want, to just talk or need some convincing. But, and thanks for having me at the super fun conversation.
Yeah, it was a pretty productive conversation and a pretty fun one too. I'll be linking out the links once the podcast is published. You can follow Yash at yashbora.eth. It is, yeah, I mean, okay, wait, no, that is your name, at the rate YB underscore effect. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But then, yeah, I love the NFTs that are there in your profile too. I was just going through your rainbow.me pro. Yeah, pretty cool ones. Yeah, but
Yeah.
then, yeah, thanks again.
A huge fan of collecting these fun
Yeah,
ones.
yeah,
Yeah. Thank
yeah.
you.
Thanks again, Yash, for joining in. It was a great session. And thanks again for tuning into the first episode of Unpacking Web3 with Aviyel. We have a great line of speakers lined up. Uh, Hopefully, we get the time to produce the podcast as often as we want to do. But then, yeah, thanks again for tuning in and see you in the next one.